The case of Cambodia is very interesting for a variety of reasons, and one reason I think is that it really is a good case to compare and contrast with different genocides, but also terrorism, as I will address a little bit later. Basically, the Cambodian genocide occurred between 1975 and 1979, and the perpetrators in this case were the Kampuchean Communist Party, also known as Red Khmer or the Khmer Rouge. And the victims were varied, and basically they were everyone else who was defined as not a loyal member of the Khmer Rouge. So the old regime, for example, those that had education, that those that had glasses were killed, or those who could read were killed. Previous military leaders, religious and ethnic groups, including Buddhists, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Muslims. And also they used a variety of different methods, including execution and starvation and forced famine. Basically about 1 to 2 million were killed, or about a quarter to a third of the population of Cambodia. And the goal was to make the society into this commune and to really start the society again. And a lot of this situation occurred in a very chaotic scenario of the Vietnam War. So we see Civil War, we see the Vietnam War around that time period, and some would classify this as an ideological-based genocide. But in essence, the Khmer Rouge took over the entire country, emptied out the cities, closed down hospitals and schools, and isolated itself. So there was no communication really with the outside world, outside of the country. They also set up a well-known prison, Office S-21, where many people were tortured and killed, and the well-known trial of Duch, prison guard, has recently taken place, and there's more writings on his mental status and trying to figure out how he became who he did. One of the big problems, of course, was that outside forces destabilized Cambodia in the 1960s. For example, the United States did, and this was ongoing scenario with the Vietnam War, but all this allowed Pol Pot to come into power. And in 1979, the Vietnamese army went ahead and went into Cambodia and put in another regime, and then started to train the Cambodian army and had ended the genocide there. But the thing that boggles my mind, and I wish I had some explanation, but sometimes you just don't, is that the Khmer Rouge under Pol Pot still was represented in the United Nations into 1989. So it wasn't until really the 90s that we saw the West, as well as the United Nations, become interested in bringing the Khmer Rouge to justice. Unfortunately, the leaders were pardoned, and even though some have been charged, we see that many of them were able to live out their lives without consequences for their genocidal behavior. And then if we look at some of the writings on their leader Pol Pot, there's a lot of interesting features there about how this man, who was raised in a really wealthy environment and went to private schools and studied in France, was a member of the French Communist Party, and then became a leader in the Cambodian Communist Party, and then generated the genocide. That it is alleged that Pol Pot died in the late 90s in the jungle of natural causes. One of the things I wanted to mention, and this is an article by Kaplan, and I talk about this in several of my classes, but Kaplan's article published in 2007, The Fifth Wave, The New Tribalism, Terrorism and Political Violence, volume 19, pages 554 to 570, where Kaplan starts talking about these particular characteristics of a fifth wave of terrorism, and the model also represents the Khmer Rouge. So if we take a look at the characteristics of Kaplan's fifth wave of terrorism, which I think we really need to take a close look at, I think Kaplan foresaw many of the things we're seeing, 10, 12 years later. But here are the characteristics in Professor Kaplan's article: that there's a radical break from previous terrorist models and a withdrawal from society. There is also the implementation of a new calendar and a focus on purity, although there is still much violence within and even genocidal violence. One of the goals is to create a new race and to socialize all of the children into this new society. And in this society, we still see that there are problems with sexual violence and also religious apocalyptic type violence and an authoritarianism leadership style. And so that's kind of what we saw in Cambodia, and Kaplan believes that's going to be the next wave of terrorism we see. So that's certainly of interest to look at. You can go online and look at the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, and the website, I believe, is www.eccc.gov.kh. That's www.eccc.gov.kh, and you can look at a lot of the information about several of the trials that have taken place there. There's also a lot of new material that we see on the Cambodian genocide. And also there's some books out, which I won't get into, that look at the biography and analysis of Pol Pot, Pol Pot's mental state, his the psychology of Pol Pot, but also the sociology of the society, how Pol Pot was able to come into power, what he did, and some of those other features. These are usually written by historians that just do an amazing job of bringing together a bunch of really important resources to paint a coherent picture of what happened. And it's very difficult in the case of Pol Pot because of the secrecy of Pol Pot and the secrecy of the Khmer Rouge. And although we were able to gain a lot more information after he lost power and the genocide ended. So it's certainly an interesting case to study, and one that can be compared to other genocides, but also perhaps give us some insight into this whole idea of genoterrorism, a genocidal terrorism, if you will, or terrorism, which is really the goal of committing a genocide. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.